In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started mixing your multi-track recordings. Now, I'm by no means an expert, but I think I can crank out a pretty polished sounding multi-track chamber ensemble recording. So if that's what you're looking to do, this is the video for you. Welcome to the Skelly School of Sound and Stuff. First off, any sound engineer will tell you that a good mix starts with a good capture or recording. So if you're very new to this and want a bit more information on how to get the best sound out of the microphone you have in the best room in your house, check out this video here where I go over some mistakes to avoid making to make your life easier when you come to mix things. The other thing to make sure of when you're recording is to play as in time and as in tune as you possibly can, because obviously this is going to make everything sound a lot better in the end. You'll probably need to record multiple takes and edit them together. Again, if you're looking for a bit of guidance on where to start with this and you don't want to be fiddling around in Audacity and you want to make your life a lot easier, go check out this video where I list some free software for you to get started, one of which we'll be using later in some of the demonstrations. So once you've got your recording as clean and as in tune and as beautiful and as delicious as possible, we're going to jump into the mix. In this video, I'm going to be going over some basic tools that are essential tools for you to take your multi-track recording and turn it into a cohesive mix. For more advanced bells and whistles like compression, pitch correction and retiming, don't shy away from those two. They are pretty universally used these days. Just in small quantities, they're absolutely fine. Consider joining the Skelly School of Sound and Stuff Facebook group, where we're building a community of curious musicians, arrangers, composers, multi-track recordists, and basically musicians like yourself. I'll be posting extra content there and answering your questions along with some of my colleagues and obviously other community members like yourself, all helping each other out. It's going to be great. Link below. So the first thing you're going to do in your mix, or balance as it's sometimes known, is just that. You're going to be balancing the volume of all the parts so that there's nothing that's sticking out too much or nothing that's getting lost. Luckily, for our purposes, if we're recording some chamber ensembles, there aren't that many parts, so it's actually quite easy to balance these parts out. And if you followed the dynamics on the score, the parts should balance themselves out quite well anyway, but if we do find that some stuff is getting lost or is poking out too much, we can automate the volume. In most DAWs, you can do this very easily. I'm going to demonstrate this in BandLab, which is one of the free bits of software in the video I mentioned earlier. Let's jump in. Here we are in BandLab. I've recorded the Sounds and Stuff theme for brass quintets. The trombone and tuba are my fake trombone and tuba, so I had to do those in Logic and import them. But the trumpet, flugelhorn and horn have all been recorded with my inbuilt mic, so they do sound a little bit lower quality, but this is for demonstration purposes to show you what you can do with slightly lower quality audio. So let's have a look at balancing the volume of these parts. Already we can see that the inbuilt microphone has picked up the instruments a lot louder because the big blobs are bigger. So what we're going to do is just have a listen and see how that sounds. So it doesn't sound too bad. It sounds okay, but I think these three instruments here are overpowering the trombone and tuba a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn them all down by about 6 decibels each. Now let's play it and see if that's sounding a bit more balanced. So that's kind of balancing, that's mixing a little bit better now, I think. Now this arrangement is so short and there's not really any dynamic contrast in it, so this is just going to be for purely demonstration purposes. But let's say we wanted to make the last 2 notes of the trombone part louder, just for whatever reasons. Maybe they're getting lost, maybe it's an important harmony or an important part. Any DAW out there worth its salt will have an automation option, an automation view or window or something to that effect. In BandLab you can find it here, this little button, which we click it here and it'll bring up these lines, and now these lines indicate the level of a control that we can automate. In this case it's volume. You can automate anything. You can automate all sorts of things like reverb or the amount of EQ or the amount of distortion on something. Very handy for creating more dynamic music in DAWs, essentially. We're going to turn up the last 2 notes here. We're going to make quite a contrast so we can hear it. What we're going to do is we're going to click here to create a little node on this line with set to volume, and then we're going to click here again and turn that right up, just so that we notice it. Maybe even turn this down a little bit to make that contrast really obvious. So if we then listen to this on its own, the trombone soloed, this is what it'll sound like. Then if we listen in context, it will be that much louder. There it is, it's poking through. But I'm going to remove that because we don't actually need it. So now that we've got all the parts balanced to a good volume and everything's quite even, we're going to want to start introducing some sort of imagery into the recording. There's a reason you usually have 2 speakers or 2 headphones. It's because you've got 2 ears, which helps you position yourself in space. So we're going to mimic this with some panning. For my quintet videos, I tend to go quite extreme. I have the trumpets very hard panned left and right, with the horn and trombone next in line, and then the tuba straight down the middle, just to emulate the standard setup of a brass quintet. You can do whatever you want, but I find the wide panning really helps give it some space and give it an image. At the moment, they're all right in the centre, so they're all just in the centre, in mono. You might as well just have 1 speaker, but we've always got 2 speakers almost all the time. So let's make use of those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pan my trumpets, probably in BandLab. I think it goes to 50. I think I'm going to go for 35 each way. 36 will do. 36 the other way. That's cool. And then sort of halfway between that, so 15 on the horn and trombone either way. And now we've got trumpet 1 on the far left, trumpet 2 or flugelhorn in this case on the far right. And then we've got trombone sort of middle right and horn middle left, and the tuba is still in the centre. So let's have a listen to that. Whoa, there's trumpets to the left of me, trumpets to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with the tuba. With tube? Oh, come on, that's awful. Anyway, there's our imaging sorted. So now that we've got a 3D image, something is still missing. It still sounds rather dead. If you've recorded it in an acoustically dead room, as recommended in the video that I've mentioned a million times now, it won't sound like it's been recorded anywhere, really. So now we need to add in our own virtual space. Let's add some reverb! The keys to reverb is to not overdo it. It's very easy to add too much reverb, especially when you're starting out mixing. It's very easy to put it in and think, oh yeah, I can hear that now, but actually you want to turn it down so that you're not noticing the reverb, it's just there. A method of doing this when you're starting out and you're not quite familiar with how much reverb is too much reverb is to turn it up way too loud so that you definitely know it's too much, and then just gradually turn it down until you don't notice it anymore, but it's still there, if that makes sense. For my brass quintets, I generally use a 3-second-ish reverb, which sounds like this. You can obviously go for a smaller or a shorter reverb to emulate a slightly smaller space if you don't like it as washy, but I wouldn't go too much bigger than this. Sometimes I do go up to 4 seconds for slower pieces, but with fast music, the articulations do tend to get muddied a bit. It's a bit like trying to play really fast music in a huge cathedral. It just gets lost. So let's add a bit of reverb in BandLab just to show you how to do it and how I would go about doing it. So I've been playing around a little bit and I've found the effects that seem to work best for this. There is this little reverb knob down here, but it wasn't quite a long enough reverb for what I wanted. I wanted a bit more of a long reverb, sort of 3 seconds. This one sounds a bit more sort of 1.5. So I had a play around earlier and I found this studio reverb effect, which you can find by going add effect, reverb, studio reverb. That does the job, it seems. So if we just turn that on. Now the key with reverb, especially in a chamber ensemble, is to have the same reverb on all your tracks. So I did actually make a little preset here which I copied over to the others. I've turned that reverb on all the tracks. The settings I'm using, if you're curious, are 2.6 on the mix, which is the amount of reverb versus the amount of the original signal, the dry and wet mix. The colour is at 4. I don't think I actually changed that from the default. If I did, let me know in the comments below or something. And the size I've set to 2.1, which I don't think equates to the actual length of the reverb. It might do, actually, but that's the size I've gone for. That sounded good to me. Obviously, play around and see what sounds good to you, but that's a good starting point. This sounds like this. And there you can see we've taken our stereo image and now we put it in a hall somewhere, and it sounds like you could be sat at the front of the audience with the quintet in front of you there in a nice reverberant room. And then finally EQ, which is kind of stepping over into the more advanced side of things because it's quite a subtle thing. It's kind of hard to hear at first, but it can be very useful if you're using cheaper or lower quality mics where they might not quite pick up all of the frequencies that you want them to. It can help to brighten a muffled sounding recording if the microphone hasn't picked up all the high frequencies, or if it hasn't quite picked up enough lows, enough of the body of the sound, you can use it to increase that as well. You can also use it to remove or reduce resonances in the room you might have recorded it in if there's anything unwanted in there. Some key things to remember for this is that it requires quite a bit of ear training to get used to the sounds of the frequencies and get used to what's where. I'm still learning where all my frequencies are. And to demonstrate, let's jump into BandLab and I'll show you how I've EQ'd the inbuilt mic recordings to try and make it sound better. Obviously, the mic is still kind of not very good, so the recordings aren't going to be amazing, but we'll see what we can do. If you are looking to increase the quality of your recordings, the most important thing that you can invest in is a microphone that is made for recording music. All of my videos pre-mid 2019-ish were recorded using one of these, and I still use it to this day. It still makes a better tuba sound than my expensive mic, better fake tuba sound than my new expensive microphone. But this is pretty cheap, it's pretty durable, it's an industry standard mic, it's a Shure SM58. I'd highly recommend that. But if you do get a microphone, that cable there is an XLR, and that's not going to plug into your computer without one of these. You're going to need an interface. This is the one I used for a long time until I upgraded to that one over there. But it's a Focusrite 2i2. This is an older model, but the newer ones are USB-C, class compliant. Plug them in and they work straight away. So I'd highly recommend one of those. But yeah, let's jump into BandLab and see what I can do with this inbuilt mic. Now, when I added the reverb, you will have noticed this little graphic EQ plugin on the trumpet, flugelhorn and horn tracks. And funnily enough, I've had a little play around with this beforehand. The EQ options in BandLab are slightly limiting, and if you are looking for something a bit more fully featured, obviously go for an app that you actually download, like GarageBand or Cakewalk were the two that I recommended for Mac and Windows respectively. But we'll see what we can do in BandLab with its graphic EQ here. Here's what the trumpet sounds like at the moment with no EQ applied. Not the nicest tone. It definitely doesn't sound like my real life tone. It's a bit kind of muffled in a way. It sounds a bit like it's done through a telephone. We can slightly alter this one. It's not going to be perfect. It's still not going to sound amazing, but it's going to sound a little bit better if we add some EQ. So if I turn this on, I'll play you what it sounds like now, and then I'll talk you through what I've done. So here it is without, and here it is with. As I said, this is getting into a bit more subtle territory with the EQing, but essentially what I've done here, these numbers here represent frequencies. These numbers here represent volume, or the amount of boost you're giving to that frequency. So you can see I've sort of given it a little boost lower down, cut out some of these 800 to 1.6 kilohertz, and then boosted these ones more than I boosted those ones. So these two high ones are sort of boosting it to try and compensate, maybe failing slightly because the mic hasn't picked up any frequencies in that range, but trying to compensate for the fact that this microphone is not picking up as many of those high frequencies as I would like, which is where a lot of the sizzle and nice bright airy sound comes from. And these two bands here are trying to attenuate slightly the nasal and slightly piercing, get inside your ear hole quality that this mic often picks up. And then these two lower ones are just trying to add a little bit more body to the sound. Now I've applied a similar EQ to the flugelhorn, which is doing pretty similar things, and are similar to the horn, although less high frequencies on the horn because it doesn't need as many of those high frequencies because it's a blending part in the middle. The best thing to do with this is to play around, just turn up one of these bands up full and see what difference it makes to get an idea of what the frequency is, and then turn it back down and then gradually increase it until it sounds a bit more palatable. By no means have I saved this recording, it still sounds a bit cheap, but like I said earlier, the best thing to invest in if you would like to improve your recording quality is a microphone. So here is what it sounds like now. I'll play it without the EQ, and now with the EQ. You can hear it's had a slight lift. The brass is slightly brighter, still a bit nasal, still a bit kind of drab sounding, but it's certainly a little bit crisper than it was before. And if you get a good recording, you won't have to do nearly as much EQing to save it. And that is it for this video. If you're looking for something a bit more advanced and you want to ask some questions or you want to have a discussion about things, check out the Facebook group at the link below. Otherwise, here are some key points to remember, for which there will be a cheat sheet to download as well. Step 1 is the volume balance. Make sure all the parts are of sort of equal volume, nothing's sticking out too much, nothing's too quiet. Chamber music is obviously fairly easy to do. As long as you play the dynamics, it should sort itself mostly out. But we can use volume automation to clean things up. Then we're going to do some panning to get a nice stereo image. Don't be shy about panning as well. Don't worry about people with broken headphones. That's their problem. Get it nice and wide to give your recording some good space. Then we'll add some reverb, and we don't want this to stand out. We don't want it to be the main feature. It should be in the background, just adding a little lift to the music. Then if things still aren't sounding great, we can add some EQ, although add the EQ before the reverb so that the reverb affects the EQ rather than the EQ affecting the reverb. With the EQ, we can use subtle or sometimes extreme boosts and cuts to mold the sound a little bit and get the sound we want from the recording we have. And finally, something we haven't touched on yet, don't get any fancy plugins until you can do all the previous things mentioned with the stock plugins. If you are interested, however, in how exactly I mix my videos and want to look into my Logic projects and the plugins that I use, although bear in mind that I only bought these plugins around 8 years down the line from starting recording and mixing, consider supporting me on Patreon, where I'll be posting a little video, little Logic session breakdown for the guys over there. If a monthly support thing isn't your jam, but you still do want to give me some monetary support, you can buy a t-shirt, a Seb Skelly t-shirt. How fun is that? Link in the description. And I think that's everything. Comment, like, share and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.